Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are in Parshat Shoftim. There's a line from this parsha, a pasuk, a sentence from this parsha that is famous. We'll see it in just a second. But there's parts of this that aren't as well known, parts of this parsha. So we'll start off with the general tone and tenor of Shoftim, and then we're going to move to a bit of a specific example because I want to bring in some teaching by Micha Goodman and as well as Dr. Mijal Biton. So to do that, we're going to look a little bit at the laws of the king. This is the beginning of Parshat Shoftim. Then we're going to jump a little bit. Okay. Shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha b'chol sha'arecha asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha. So you shall appoint shoftim, judges, and shotrim, officers, magistrates is what this translation is calling it. In all of your, some people translate this as gates, sha'ar, gate. They're translating it here as tribes. Meaning every place that a tribe dwells, every one of those places has a gate, but it really refers essentially to gates. That's where cases were heard in ancient Israel and in ancient Mesopotamia. That is the ancient Near East. That's where cases were heard, in the big city gates. The judges would sit there and people would bring their disagreements forward to the judges, and the judges would rule. Okay, so that God in the place that God is giving you, all these settlements, these gates that God is giving you, and you shall govern the people mishpat tzedek, with justice that is about tzedek, righteousness. But this word tzedek is going to appear a lot, and so we're gonna unpack it a little bit. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes. For bribes blind the eyes of chachamim, of wise people, and upset the plea of the just. Here's our famous line: Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, lema'an tichyeh. So justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that Adonai, your God, is giving you. You shall not set up an Asherah or anything like it by an altar made for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. You will not put up a stone matzeva the way other cultures and pagan religions do in the place that you're about to occupy. For Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh hates that stuff. So what has to happen, first of all, when you come into, the land? Remember, this is Moshe talking to the people before they enter the land. Of course, it's written way long after that. But it's imaginary in the mouth of Moshe as they're about to cross in. So what we're told is that one of the first things they need to do is set up judges, to set up officials who will adjudicate when there is an issue. And so the first thing that we're told they need to do is set up governing bodies. And what is important about those governing bodies? What's important, it seems to be, that they don't take bribes. So they are not influenced by money, and because that wrecks the course of justice, and they shall not show partiality. So what does that mean? So why would you show partiality as a judge if it's not about taking money, right? Usually it's about wanting to curry favor with powerful people. So if a client comes, a person comes before you who's a very famous mover and shaker and has an issue with somebody who's Plony Ben Plony, so a nobody, You are not allowed to judge in such a way that's showing partiality either to the powerful person or the poor person because you feel like they never get a fair shake. You have to judge according to the facts and according to the law. So you can't show partiality either to the powerful and the wealthy, nor the vulnerable. And that can be about being poor. That can be about being marginalized for other reasons, whatever. Okay. So it has to be based on the law and the facts before the judge. All right. So then, of course, we have something that goes to ritual law, because there's really, in some ways, no separation, but we're going to see a bit of a separation in a minute. But this is a theocracy in terms of there's no separating the law from divinity, because the law originates with divinity. And the law is about tzedek. The law is about justice. So we're gonna keep that in mind as we look at what Micha Goodman has to say about the laws regarding a king. So we know that Israel had a king, and then the divided kingdoms each had a monarch, and they were quite central to the government. They were quite powerful. But let's see what Torah has to say, what Deuteronomy has to say, as we're talking about governance, when we're talking about a king. If, after you've entered the land that your God, Adonai, has assigned to you, and taken possession of it and settled in it, you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me, you are free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by your God. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kin. What's the Hebrew? Asher lo achicha hu. What does that literally mean? Who's not your what? Brother. So what does it do right away? Micha Goodman says right away, it identifies the king as achicha, your brother. Not from a different lineage, not from some divine right of kings, not from royal, blood, blah, blah, your brother. So it already starts to diminish the sense of hierarchy that one expects when dealing with somebody who is now going to be royal and in that position. The other thing Micha points out is ki tavo el haaretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach. So what has to happen first? You have to come to the land, you have to inherit the land, and you have to settle the land. All of those things have to happen before you can set a king over yourself. Why is that important? Why does that stick out for Micha? Because Micha says many kings in many ancient Near Eastern societies were understood as establishing the nation, right? It's the king the founding of the nation is attributed to the king. And it is made very explicit, that's kind of Department of Redundancy department, but it's made explicit in Torah that the king is achicha, your brother, your peer, and you can't pick a king until the people have settled the land that God gives you. Okay, so that already changes a little bit about what's possible in terms of how the king is regarded. Okay. The king will not keep a bunch of susim, a bunch of horses, and will not send people back to Egypt to add to his horses. Since Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has warned you, you must not go back that way again. He shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him, and let him read it all his life, so that he may learn to revere Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as the law. Thus he will not act haughtily towards his fellows, nor deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. All right, so what are we told about the king? Immediately when you start talking about having a king, Dr. Goodman points out, okay, you can do that. We've been told it's got to be your peer, and it's to be understood that that person did not found the kingdom. You are placing that person on the throne and giving that person a certain amount of authority and power. But as soon as Deuteronomy introduces the idea, after judges, by the way, after you shall appoint judges, right, to take care of the business of governing the people, after that, ones who are not supposed to be influenced by who comes before them and their power and their influence and their connections and their wealth. After that, we get told, okay, if you want to have a king, you can. But what does Deuteronomy do right away? Micha says, as soon as Deuteronomy introduces the idea of the monarchy, it starts talking about limiting the power of the monarchy right away. It's not like, here's everything the king gets to do, and here's what the king shouldn't do. It's like, okay, you can place a king over yourself, but it immediately goes to limiting that power. What are some of the limits being placed on that power? That the king shouldn't have a bunch of horses, okay, and certainly can't be trading Israelites for bonded labor to places like Egypt, who needed migrant workers to harvest often the fields in the north. So why is this here? Horses? Like, who cares? Why is it the first thing here?
Aren't horses a symbol of strength and power?
In what way, Bert?
Yeah, I mean, the first of all, it is the people that decide to have a king. So this is classic Torah people power.
Right.
Could theoretically not decide to have a king. So the first thing is the king owes his position to the people.
Correct.
And then there's a limitation on wealth and power of the king.
So how are horses power?
Because of their military power. At that time, horses were what drew the chariots. Remember the chariots, the horses, the chariots drowned in the sea?
So the king shall not have a huge private military force that he controls.
No ice.
Interesting. Right? The king has limits placed on how big the king's army can be. And because it's understood by Torah, by the Deuteronomist, it's understood that there's an inherent danger in the king having access to an army. So yes, the king has to have access to an army in order to defend the people and to defend the sovereignty of the nation. But that is not to be confused with the king being able to control a huge army that the king gets to do whatever the king wants to with.
So no private armies.
Interesting, And he shall not have many wives. Why?
Many wives means many children, and the power of a dynasty of some sort.
Why else do kings marry?
To form alliances.
Form alliances.
And they don't want his heart to go astray with someone who believes in not the God of Israel, or is a pagan, in other words.
Correct. So, if you're going to form alliances, King, Your Highness, form alliances wisely, not to line your pockets, right? Do not ally yourself with powerful people because they can make you powerful, or because you're enamored of them, or because you want favors from them, do so wisely, because it will influence the king. It will influence the direction of the politics of the country. When you have someone in your home, in your palace, so close to the seat of power somewhere else, they have the king's ear. Okay, Rachel?
Thanks. Those are all really, really excellent points that I hadn't really thought of. I just kept thinking about how this is so much in contrast to other kingdoms at the time, or sort of, that it seems like all of this is like, don't do what these other guys are doing. And it's not at exactly the same time, but the first thing that, it's later, but same, like, surrounding area, Alexander of Macedon, in the mythology, like Alexander and Bucephalus, his horse, this relationship between a king and his horse, like there really is this symbolism between like the hero and his horse that really is a symbol of masculinity and power and prowess. So, and you see this throughout, all over the, like, Mesopotamia, the ancient world. There's so much mythology around like a hero. But then also the whole thing with like not just gathering up a harem throughout, and Greek mythology is the first thing that comes to mind for me. But, just like pointing to a woman and saying, that one, very much about like, just because. We've got like, starting a war over, like Helen of Troy, or that it's something that like, don't be like these other guys around you who just will, who are just acquiring for the sake of acquiring. Right. So it's like, it's as if it's in contrast to, it's very much like, it's what you shouldn't do. It's not just what you should do, it's what you shouldn't do, because this is what all the other guys are doing.
So. Micha points that out and says, Deuteronomy comes along to say, you can have a monarchy, but be very careful. Because we've seen what that does. We've seen what a monarchy can cause, right? Because we've seen Assyria destroy the north. We've seen what happens when a king becomes an emperor and is in search of an empire, right? Well, that means acquisition, exactly to your point. Lots of power, lots of horses, lots of cars, lots of homes, lots of, whatever, airplanes, and lots of, and treating women and other human beings as property, whether it's trading their labor back to Egypt to get more horses, or whether it's acquiring wives because you can. Like you said, that one, please, right? Like, so be very careful not to have a monarchy like the monarchies around you. 100%. That's what this is. So what Micha taught us is that Deuteronomy comes as a way of discussing checks on what we know was the political system of the time. So it's kind of interesting because when this is published, when this is being taught, there's a king. So, right? So we kind of forget. This is not before there's a land of Israel. This is written in the land of Israel with a king. So the king has to agree to this teaching that there are limits on the monarchy. So that already is remarkable, I think, right? That this is being taught and pushed by Josiah, by Hezekiah. Like this is being supported by the monarchy. This idea that there's a limitation on the power of the king. Okay. So when the king is sitting on the throne, so this is saying, V'chatav lo, he shall have written for him Mishneh HaTorah Hazot, this Torah, meaning Deuteronomy. But many people translate this as V'chatav lo, he shall write for himself this book of law. in front of who? HaKohanim, HaLeviim, the Levites who are priests. Okay, so the king has to write or have written for him the law, this law, including all this stuff limiting the power of the monarch, in front of the Levitical priests. So who's the authority here in terms of the law? Right? The authority is not the king. The authority are the Levitical priests. And who do the Levitical priests answer to? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. So the king has to write the law, or at least have written for him, meaning study the law, deferring to the authority of the priests to interpret the law. And the law originates with God. So anything about the king being divine and being part of the law making is gone in ancient Israel. Gone. It's explicit here that the king must know and follow the law. What an idea. Bert?
Years ago, I had to sign a document in France, and they actually made you copy the document, not just sign it. It was very, very, very interesting. And the reason is then you would absorb it.
Then your signature means something. If you have to write it out, right? The whole agreement, what you're agreeing to, then right, your signature means something different. That's why I think a lot of people translate this as v'chatavlo, he shall write for himself. The king has to write it. The king has to sit and copy out the law. Because what it means is the king must know the law. You can't follow the law if you don't know the law. Imagine that. Knowing the law is, right?
And Amy, if it's not, if it is indeed that he's supposed to write it for himself, then why do they even have the line in there about the priests and the Kohanim?
Because he has to do it in front of the priests.
Oh, so it's just that would be another interpretation that he's writing it for himself, but in front of them.
Correct. So that they're the authority. The king can't go directly to God or claim to be getting the law from God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That he has to copy the law that the priests are the keepers of. So it's the priests who are who are connected to the divine in this case, not the king. To Rachel's point, many kings were understood to be gods. And if not, they were in relation to the God who has the king found this nation and found this, whatever. And the king brings the law to the people from the God so that when the people obey the king, they are obeying the God. Torah comes to make it explicit that that is not the case in ancient Israel. That the king, that God gives the law, the priests are the ones in relationship to the divine household, if you will, the Mishkan, and the law. And the king must follow that law that he writes in front of the priests.
I can think of a certain leader of this country that needs to follow some of this stuff.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
What if we took this seriously?
Yeah.
Right? And not just us. There's many countries I can think of right now who, right, this teaches the eternal tendency of people in power.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't change, right? Some people are like, oh my gosh, that's so, prescient. No, it doesn't change. Human nature doesn't change. If power corrupts, then absolute power, we know, corrupts absolutely. And Torah knows that. And ancient Israel knew that. and wanted a Deuteronomy society, wanted a society governed by law, not by a king. And this is just antithetical to what was happening in the neighborhood. And it's where democracy has its beginning, that the power is with the people and the divinely inspired understanding of what tzedek is, what justice is. And the king must follow that and is beholden to that. And it's the people, to Bert's point, that set the king over themselves. It is not the divine right of kings. That's nowhere in ancient Israel's understanding of the monarchy, or at least from what we have, right, in Deuteronomy. The king might have disagreed, but what won the day was the Deuteronomist. And we know that the kings fell, right? And the kingdom divided in large part because Solomon taxed the people so heavily to build his palaces and have all his wives that he undercut the unity and the health of the economic system. So that's how we get the divided monarchy. And then we know that it was just further and further weakened by the character of the king and the people following the king, and both fall. Israel and Judah both fall, and the people are exiled, right? And the project is over until 48. All right. Anything anybody want to add or say here?
Did you just say the project is over until 48?
Yes.
What does that mean?
The sovereignty of the Jewish people in the land of Israel ended when Judah fell in 70 CE. We were exiled and the project was over until 1948, when we once again got sovereignty in the land of Israel. So, yeah. So if the king has to study the law, right? Anyway. Bert?
Just two things, actually, from the very beginning that you were talking about, that you have, it says you shouldn't put up the posts of the other countries. Instead, you should stand up magistrates. So the magistrates, it's almost the same kind of language that is used for magistrates, and it goes through that, and then at the end it says, and you shouldn't stand up the posts again. So it's kind of like a donut of don't do the posts of other cultures. And the other thing is, I was struck by the don't take any bribes, because in the prior portion, you have, when you talk about, it talks about God, it says God doesn't take any bribes. So here we have the judges shouldn't take any bribes. So I guess the implication is the judges should be godly.
Yes.
And it's not just I think it's not just a question of bribes. I would extend that to influence of all different kinds.
Yes.
That would include making money off the government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Family people making money off of the government. And
yeah, Torah doesn't like that.
It doesn't like that.
Torah doesn't like that. And Torah doesn't want justices who are in the pocket of influential people either.
Right. Now, there were no airplanes back then.
Directed to the king and to the judges. Don't take bribes, judges. Don't take cruises and accept extravagant trips, judges, lest it influence your sense of justice and how you adjudicate the law. It's so obvious. It's like, duh. And I mean, I don't mean that to you, Bert. I mean, I'm just like, hello, right?
Right.
Or airplanes from Qatar. So it's so clear because it's so much human nature. Once you have power, it is very easy to sell out, right? Your integrity to get more of whatever it is you want. More power, more influence, more protection, more cryptocurrency, more whatever it is. To get more is the human tendency. And Torah says, nuh-uh. That is not how you will keep the land.
And the sad thing is, for those of us who happen to love America, the consequence of that kind of a thing is the falling of the country.
Correct.
I mean,
And
part of
that
what
is
Torah
what
says
Torah,
is
that's what
God
Torah
does
saying.
it, but it's saying it will happen. That if you have society that does that, at some point in the end, it's going to fall.
Yes. Yes. And so for a lot of us who studied with Micha, who unpacked Deuteronomy for us, we're like, oh, hello. Right? Like, it was known even then. Like, if you have corrupt judges who are in the pocket of the king or in the pocket of powerful people, the project will be over. And it ends. And Micha taught us, and I taught this to you also a few years ago, Micha taught us that the project, it doesn't end in Deuteronomy. Our scriptures go on to when we're in the land. And our scriptures go on to talk about Josiah not allowing the Egyptian king to cross because God will protect us. And so the kingdom falls. And the people are taken back. Many flee to Egypt. So the whole project of coming out of Egypt to start this whole, promised land business ends with us going back to Egypt. It's a failure. Torah is the study of a failure. And if we don't take that seriously, we are in deep, deep trouble.
And this applies not just to the country we live in.
It applies to
There's a lot of people who say it applies to Israel.
Yes, any country. And that if it becomes corrupt in all of these ways, then you are talking about the project failing. And exile. Deuteronomy is very clear about that. Exile is what happens, meaning you lose sovereignty. And that's where we're at.
Can I I'm sort of curious about the fact that Bert said that in the previous chapter, I guess, we're not supposed to give bribes to God. That's a sort of odd idea because the entire sacrificial system is based on nothing less than a bribe to God, it seems to me. And there's a model there. I understand that maybe you're not getting tit for tat, but actually it's offering something with the hope that God will give you something back.
So Lisa, answer your own question based on what I taught last week.
Yeah. What's that?
Answer your own question based on what I taught last week.
You expect me to remember last week.
Last week we talked about the fact that sacrifice is not a big deal anymore for the Deuteronomist.
Now, but the whole model for sacrifice is that notion of a bribe.
So Deuteronomy takes sacrifice out of the lives of the people. Deuteronomy takes the sacrifice out of their eating meat.
Yes, right. That I remember.
That's why. That's part of the move of the Deuteronomy school is to reduce sacrifice to being the ones that you share with the poor and the foreigner and the whatever, the shlamim. That's every other sacrifice is pretty much gone. You can eat meat whenever you want.
But if we say that prayer is essentially the replacement for meat that's being sacrificed, it's still in a sense the same model. You get something if you give something, or if you offer up something, and that's still in our heads that's a possibility, and that's influential.
So I don't think that we operate in any kind of a relationship with a sense that I don't have to give anything in order to receive. We don't do relationships like that.
Mm-hmm.
I expect your loyalty to me because I'm going to be loyal to you. I intend for you to speak respectfully to me because I'm going to speak respectfully to you. Mm-hmm. That's built into relationship is that but
we're talking
give
about
and take
relationships. We're talking about bad relationships. Good relationships, there's no problem.
Well, Well, right. So if we consider our relationship to the source of life to be a good one and a healthy one,
Yeah.
I would speak to the source with respect and love, because that's how I experience being held by that source.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, every prayer or every sacrifice is in the head of whoever makes the sacrifice too.
Correct.
So
Correct.
with bad intentions, good intentions, corrupt intentions, or whatever. But all I'm saying is that it's an interesting model that is perpetrated or held back, but that we think of things in that way, that if we sacrifice to you, you'll give something to us back.
So I guess what I'm trying to be clear about is Deuteronomy's coming to criticize that theology.
I understand. Yeah.
The Deuteronomist is saying we're moving away from that because it doesn't work. Like, that's not a healthy system. A healthy system is put judges in your gates that are wise and discerning and inured to, the trappings and temptations of that role, right? So the Deuteronomist is coming to criticize the sacrificial system and desacralize the lives of Israelites as regards eating meat and such things. It can't totally obliterate that system. I mean, right? But it's coming to curb the role of the sacrificial system big time. Big time.
Interesting.
All right. I knew Bubby would show up. There she is. I knew she'd be here. She wasn't going to miss this one. No, it's her favorite. Okay. So let's look a little bit more at this concept of tzedek. Okay. So we're going to turn to Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. If I can get my computer to behave, which I don't seem to be able to do. Here we go. Shoftim. Okay. Rabbi Sacks argues that it's really hard to translate the word tzedakah. That it's very, very difficult. Why? He says mishpat alone cannot create a good society. Mishpat is when we talk about following the law. To it must be added tzedakah, distributive justice. One can imagine a society which fastidiously observes the rule of law and yet contains so much inequality that wealth is concentrated into the hands of the few and many are left without the most basic requirements of a dignified existence. Could one imagine such a thing? There may be high unemployment and widespread poverty. Some may live in palaces while others go homeless. That is not the kind of order that the Torah contemplates. There must be justice not only in how the law is applied, but also in how the means of existence, wealth as God's blessing, are distributed. That is tzedakah. So he's saying mishpat's not enough. To just follow the law is not enough, because you can write laws in such a way that you can follow the law and justice is not happening. There is too much inequity built into the law itself. Tzedakah cannot be translated because it joins together two concepts that in other language are opposites, namely charity and justice. Suppose, for example, that I give someone $100. Either he is entitled to it or he is not. If he is, then my act is a form of justice. If he is not, it is an act of charity. In English, a gesture of charity cannot be an act of justice, nor can an act of justice be described as charity. Tzedakah is therefore an unusual term because it means both. It arises from the theology of Judaism, which insists on the difference between possession and ownership. Ultimately, all things are owned by God, creator of the world. What we possess, we do not own. We merely hold it in trust for God. I think that is a profound insight of Rabbi Lord Sacks, is that tzedakah in other languages, it applies to things that are opposite. Either you're owed it, in which case that's justice, or it's given to you out of compassion and respect because that's what should be, in which case it's caritas, it's charity. And that the theology of Judaism is such that you can have a word tzedakah, which encompasses both of those that are opposites in other languages and in other traditions. How? Because we don't own anything, he's saying. We understand that the entire universe is owned by none other than itself, capital I. The universe belongs to itself. We don't own anything. We simply are given possession of stuff to use. But we're only going to hold possession of it, says Torah, if we use it within the confines of how we understand distributive justice. That there's a threshold below which no one is allowed to fall. That's the only way we are going to hold our possessions and be able to benefit from them and use them for our comfort and ease and whatever, is if we don't allow anyone to suffer not having minimally what Torah understands everybody is owed. Okay? Let's look at Doniel Hartman. He says, there are those who make a claim on us, not by virtue of their service and indispensability to our societal ends, because he's talking about some folks like foreign workers who come and contribute to society because Americans don't want to do that, or Israelis don't want to do that work. But he's talking about a third category now, but by virtue of their rights and needs. Individuals who, in the spirit of Kant, demand to be seen and treated as ends unto themselves, independent of their utilitarian role. He's talking here about if they are refugees, they claim their inalienable right to life and to a life free from torture and oppression. If they are job seekers, they claim their right to a life free of disease and poverty, which our society has an ability to provide. While the legal status of the refugee versus the illegal immigrant is not the same, they both make a moral claim and demand to be seen and treated with the compassion and justice that their humanity implies. When it comes to illegal immigrants, it is both morally and legally legitimate for a society to measure its ability to respond to their needs in relationship to the needs of its own citizens and its ability to share its own societal goods without harming to too significant a degree the welfare of those toward whom it has a primary responsibility. However, all tzedakah entails accepting some measure of personal harm and financial loss. The moment that one gives to others inherently limits what one has to give one's own. The obligation of tzedakah, the duty to create a society of tzedek, nevertheless obligates us to share some of our resources with some of those less fortunate than we are. We can debate the number of this sum, given the size and identity of our society, but as Jews, we ought not to debate the obligation itself. So Doniel Hartman is saying Torah teaches we must sacrifice, if you want to use that language, Lisa, we must give some of what we have that we'd rather keep for ourselves. We must give that even to the refugee and to the illegal immigrant. Now, to what extent we can argue? To what extent do you damage your own population and take away from your own population in order to treat with dignity and compassion the illegal immigrant and the refugee, who have inalienable rights to dignity and to live without fear and poverty and disease and all of the other things that cause one to not be able to live in dignity? To what degree? That's where we argue. That's where policy decisions come in. But the basic foundational understanding that even the illegal immigrant has a right to tzedakah should not be questioned by Jews, says Doniel Hartman, based on what we're studying here. That is tzedek. because it also talks about the alien, the ger, right? The stranger who's living among you. Okay. I'm just saying. I don't make this stuff up, people. It's right here. Okay. Let's look at Michelle Biton. Shoftim, she says, turns our attention to the political dimension of Jewish life. Okay. Elul, meaning this month we're beginning before high holidays, turns us inward to the spiritual. And this year, the Torah's timing feels like more than coincidence. It feels like a reminder of where to turn. This week in Shoftim, Moses turns for the first time in his great Deuteronomy speeches squarely to the political dimension of Jewish life. Systems for judges, kings, prophets, and cities of refuge. After so many chapters devoted to reverence, humility, memory, and service of God, the spiritual dimension, Moses finally lays out the structures of governance. That sequencing should give us pause. Moses' speech could have opened with politics, monarchs, armies, statescraft, as if government were the heart of Jewish society. Instead, it begins with the inner and spiritual work of individuals and communities, ego, reverence, faith, memory, and only afterward describes the scaffolding of governance. Shoftim follows chapters that expand on the Ten Commandments, underscoring that spiritual life is the foundation upon which politics rests. The Torah seems to be saying that political institutions, however vital, cannot endure unless they are rooted first in the divine. Even within Shoftim itself, the order is striking. The portion begins not with the king, not with charisma or military might, but with the judges. And then we see Deuteronomy 16:18. Governance begins with accountability, impartiality, and the rejection of bribes. Only afterward, almost reluctantly, does the Torah address the possibility of a king. And even then, it places strict limits on his authority. He may not multiply horses, wives, or wealth. He must keep a Torah scroll beside him at all times, a reminder that even at the summit of power, he remains bound to a higher law. At the same time, Judaism is not a post-Enlightenment Protestant-style faith focused only on inner salvation or the separation of church and state. It insists that politics, too, is an essential part of Jewish religious life. The message is clear. Politics matters enormously. It organizes society, defends the vulnerable, restrains corruption. But it is not the first thing, and it is not the only thing. The spiritual dimension precedes it, and the political dimension is hemmed by law. Shoftim insists that politics be kept in its place, essential but bounded, vital yet answerable to deeper moral and spiritual priorities. Elul, this month, is a reminder to hold fast to the dimension of life that remains most fully in our agency. It arrives like oxygen for starved lungs. After months of suffocation in the shadow of power struggles, Elul restores us to the one realm we truly command. Its ancient rhythm insists that beyond politics, there is work only we can do. At first, it might feel impossible. How can we think about our own tshuva when we are still at war? She's writing about, of course, Israel. And yet it also feels like grounding work without which nothing else can endure. When the political dimension falters, when battles lie beyond our reach, the spiritual one still holds us. Elul offers work no government can take away, the work of return, repair, forgiveness, and growth. It calls us to examine our relationships, to mend what we can, to come back to who we want to be. That is work squarely in our hands. As Jews, we are not called to choose between politics and spirituality. We must remain committed to fighting for a politics of hope and mutual safety in this difficult time. But Elul offers us an invitation to calibrate our focus. Without the grounding of the spiritual dimension and without the willingness of ordinary people to rise to it, politics alone cannot sustain us. This is why Shoftim turns to politics only after pages of Moshe's spiritual call. This Elul is an invitation for us all to grasp the spiritual dimension with both hands, to recover the language of the soul, and to weave it back into the rhythm of our lives. She's writing as an American who is very distressed with what's happening in America, and as someone deeply concerned with what's happening in Israel as well. And saying it can feel like we don't make the decisions, and therefore we have no power. And she's saying Elul comes to remind us, yes, you do, which I really needed to hear. Like she said, like oxygen to starved lungs. I really needed to hear that message right now, that Elul comes with the reading of Shoftim to say it's not separate. This idea of doing tshuva, this idea of coming together as a community for Rosh Hashanah and starting the process of tshuva, of repentance, and taking accountability for the ways that we've gone amiss, astray, that is a deeply personal and communal spiritual project that impacts our politics. When we can get our house in order, when we can look at our priorities again and recommit to what those actually are, each of us individually, each of us as households, each of us as communities, it helps return us to a commitment to politics as they should be. They are not separate from our values and our morals and our understanding of what Judaism demands from us. They are interrelated. And I think right now we desperately need that sense of connection between what we do at high holidays and what's happening in the larger world, because so much of it feels out of our control. And there's so much going on with, for me anyway, a sense of learned helplessness, a sense that it's just too big. There's not a way for me to influence or impact what's happening in Israel or what's happening here. So that's what I need to focus on. I'm aware that I need to focus on, okay, what do I have some agency over? Where do I have some ability to control what's happening in my world? Because for those of us whose houses burned down, and those of us who are just part of this community that are in galut, that are in diaspora because we can't be in the building, it all feels just so out of control. And so I don't have an answer, but I feel like Dr. Mijal Bitan hit on, for me, the place that I need to be turning. We talk about that. Tshuva is to turn. And I need to be turning back to this sense of, okay, what can I impact? And what is my responsibility around that at this season, both as a person, as a spiritual leader, as a community leader? What are the ways I can be impactful, and how do I get busy?
Can you send us that? I thought it was brilliant. I mean,
Yeah.
It really put things in perspective for me, so I would appreciate getting it.
100%. And yeah, she's an amazing teacher and thinker and sociologist.
You said she's American? She's here?
She is American. She studies Sephardi American Judaism. She is a brown person. And so she identifies very much as a brown person. Sociologically, she studies brown Jews, if you will. And is brilliant about her insights about how we're caught as Jews, both being people who have power and who identify as not having power and of being oppressed. And she's just brilliant. I think I told you once, when I heard her, she was speaking about having been on a panel with a man a white man in his early 20s. And she said, I had way more access to power and influence and wealth than he will ever. And I am a brown female who's a Jew.
Why did she say that?
Because he didn't have access to money to get an education. He was only going to be able to get a job that was going to be manual labor. So she was saying, it's an interesting position we're in. She goes, I'm a brown female Jew who has more access to the halls of power and the privileges and whatever that comes with that than he does. And I'm a woman, right? And I'm a brown person, and I'm a Jew, and on all those fronts, also face oppression and vulnerability. And so
the problem is he's the one in power, though. Maybe he has access, or he doesn't have as much access as she does, but it's his people that are running the show.
So, well, is it? I mean, I don't know.
I fear it is.
I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, it's very interesting work she does at the intersection of all of that, looking at power and power dynamics and sociology. So that's what I have for you today.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday Morning Torah Study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.